Everyone else, who's got the most experience? Anyone have more than 10 years? You guys are more or less the veterans. So cool, we've got a good range on talents and abilities of the boat. So a lot of what I'm going to go over, if you already know it, no big deal, but for the newer guys, a lot of this stuff does matter in setting up, tuning the flying at Scot, and we're going to show you a lot of the tips and tricks we do to kind of dial the boat in to make it go fast in any conditions. So as far as notes go, I really like to separate.
Are you going to help us go the right direction?
Maybe. I'll draw up a few tactical things, but in the lake here, your guess is probably as good as mine. So for notes, what I really like to do is separate out the notes into, if you think about every team's got a point in the wind range between 2 and 20 knots that they become overpowered. So if you really think about your notes, there are things you're doing to the Flying Scot to power it up when you don't have enough power, and then there's things to do to manage the power once you become overpowered. The reason you want to set up your notes that way is every team's going to be a little different. A heavier team might become overpowered in, say, 14 knots, and a light team might be overpowered in 8 knots.
Yes. Say notes?
Yes.
Notes.
Yeah, you take notes, right?
Oh, notes. Okay.
Yes, yes. So we describe everything kind of in that manner of, hey, we're trying to power up the boat, we're trying to depower the boat, okay? So on everyone's notes, I would say the lighter teams, you kind of want to make that mark around 8, 9 knots, and the heavier teams kind of feel it out. It can be anywhere from 12 to 14 knots. So
how do you define lighter and heavier teams?
by your crew weight combined.
Yeah, so what weight
So I've seen teams sail as light as 270 in the Flying Scot, like a light husband-wife type of team. And then, for example, PJ and I at Midwinter's probably weighed a good 410, 415. I know teams sail as heavy as 450 or even more, but I think your boat speed starts to suffer when you get above kind of 420 or 430 pounds in that range. You could still sail the boat fast, it just becomes harder and harder and harder to make it go fast. Same thing if you're super, super light, you start to get overpowered. Some of the heavy teams can just sit on the rail and they're going to have better boat speed, and you really have to go almost to the extreme on setups to manage the boat. So the good thing is today we're going to get a very good example of the light wind, okay? And so I would say on the Flying Scot what I've seen is really what you're fighting in light air is you're fighting and trying to get as much flow in the sails as you possibly can get. So how much attention do you spend to your upper leach streamers on both the jib and the main? If you think about it, that's your key indicator on whether you've got flow in the sail or not, whether you need to outsheet it or whether you just have the right sailing angle or not. So if you think about it, there's 3 fundamental things that you need to focus on in this under 7 knot range, and it's pretty much your right on this one. Somebody's buffing this boat. So, these 3 things, and this sounds oversimplified here. Let me see if I can get this to stay. No, it's okay. Once Eric gets the dry erase stuff, I'll go ahead and transfer this over. So, if you think about it, almost everything we're doing in the boat in light air comes down to these 3 fundamentals, okay? What we mainly see in the Flying Scot is teams over-trim the main and the jib in the light air. And so where you'll see that is your leach streamers will absolutely be dead and hanging straight down or even backed on the sail. So a couple more things that are going to help you increase the flow in the upper part of the sail. If you think about what your halyards do, when you start to ease your halyards off, your leaches open up. So another mistake we see that a lot of teams make is they over-tighten their main and jib halyard. And then finally, with the weight placement there, we're seeing a lot of teams sail the boat way too flat. In our notes, we suggest that you sail the boat around 7 degrees, and in light air, there's really no limit to that. You can sail more than 7 degrees. It's pretty much whatever it takes to get the leaches to open up. So PJ is often hiking as hard in light air as he is in heavy air to lure. So we both hike off the leeward side to heel the boat as much as possible until you see both leeches open up. And then one of the big things that I do is instead of having your crew sit in first, normally I'm the first one to weather because I'll gain a better vantage point on looking at the sails. So if we go from 0 to 2 knots where we're just trying to get the boat working to that where now we've got a little bit of pressure in the sails, the telltales are working, now I'm going to transition to weather so I can see those two telltales better through the windows in the sail. So if you think about just good weight placement, not only do you need to heel, but also you've got to have a team strategy on how you're going to transition your weight to weather as the pressure builds up. The other thing, obviously the skipper's got to be an advantage point where they can see the telltales, because if you're not steering the boat dead to the telltales, you're going to end up losing pressure in the rig. If you think about your telltales, they're indicating more than just your steering angle. They're also giving you information about how much flows in the sail. Everyone kind of knows when those two telltales sag, even though you're locked in on your angle, when they sag, you're starting to get reduction in flow in the sail. And at that point, you actually want to ease the sail out to help it get more flow through the slot there. So you're going to naturally sail a little lower angle. So there's a lot of talk, at least between PJ and I, about what's going on, not only with the steering angle, but the amount of pressure in the jib. So when I'm looking at the jib, when I'm to leeward, I can see the telltales that you kind of have to look around your crew to get a good eye on them. So I know where to steer, but I'm also looking upward at the leech telltale.
So when you're saying telltales, are you talking at this point solely about the leech telltales?
Both. So
okay.
you're looking at your leech telltale for flow. You're also reading your steering telltales on the jib for not only where you need to point the boat, but also how much flow is in that part of the sail as well. So you can have flow at the upper, like let's say your telltale on the leech is stagnant, you're gonna see your lower telltale start to drop on you, and that's an indication that you kind of have a restricted jib, you're a little too tight. Remember, there's a couple solutions here. It might be because you're sailing the boat too flat, that gravity's taken over and you kind of shut down the leeches. Or it could be that you're outright over trimmed. You're gonna have to make that judgment on the boat. There's no right answer. Obviously, if you're heeled all the way and you're still close to that stalled edge, then easing will be the right solution to that problem. But if you're sailing dead flat and you're not putting any of your weight out, just putting the weight out might make it to where you don't need to use the sails. So just like in anything else in sailing, you don't want to let off on the gas pedal. Easing the sails is good if you have a flow problem, but you don't want to ease the sails if you're sailing the boat too flat, because then you're not going to be pointing as high. Your trade-off there is, in order to get the leeches open, you're going to have to ease the sails too far, and your pointing angle is going to suffer, so you're going to sail a lot of excess distance. So we always say to sail a really good angle upwind in light air, you have to have the heel, weight placement, you've got to have the trim and the steering angle all in unison. And when you get it right, the Scot will power up and go. It's a nice thing when you're on the water. So always be looking at your heel angle and sail trim, and then the skipper has some time to adjust their steering where it needs to be once those are right. If you think about it, if you did the steering first and then the weight placement second, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to missteer the boat. So as a skipper, I want to know that my crew is in the right spot first. Then I kind of fine-tune the sail trim to where it needs to be. Obviously, you're getting the heel going first, then your sail trim, then you can really focus on your steering angle. And in a lake like this, it might be pretty wild where we have a lot of shifts and winders and all sorts of weird pressure where you're going to have to be on top of your focus pretty much 100% of the time, because any little bobble and now the boat's off course, or you flatten it too much because you pinched, that type of thing. There's a myriad of things that can go bad on the lake if you lose your focus. So today, when we do get out on the water, think about that. Where does your head need to be to make the boat really go fast in light air? And also, where do you need to be looking on the course to find the pressure, as well as stay focused on the sails to keep your boat moving all throughout the shifts and changes with the wind and stuff.
Does your windward sheeting play into opening up the leech, or in light air? How do you play it?
If you think about the weather sheeting, it's actually to pull the clue inboard, but it also increases the hook in the leech and the jib. So you're stalling the leech by weather sheeting. We don't weather sheet until we think we have appropriate pressure to go into like a point of So if you think about back to our range of wind between 2 and 20 knots, we allow the boat to pressure up in that lighter range, so under 7 when we're striving for more and more power. I want that slop to be a little more open. I want to really maximize the flow in the upper leach of the jib. And so I'm really tentative to put weather sheeting on unless I'm, like, let's say I'm in a lane and I need to fight for a bolt length. We may put it on for a little, but you're going to be so subtle with it. You don't, like, I know in other boats you kind of ram it on and really bring the jib in, and that's how you point. But in the Scot, you always have to have your pressure before you can really point the boat. If you go into point mode too early, she's going to slow down and start to slide sideways on you. So a lot of stuff there in light air. So on our setup, if you look at the notes, there's a couple things that is going to affect your leaches, especially your upper leaches on your main and jib. We've already kind of hinted on the halyard tensions. So if we're sailing upwind, heeling the boat, sail seems to be eased enough, but we still have a shutdown leach. Something that can help you out there is just one click at a time, lower your jib halyard, and sometimes it's the main that's stalled and you need to lower the main. I know there is a problem with a lot of the sails where the bolt ropes shrink. And if you think about a shrunken bolt rope, it's actually going to shut down the leach a lot. So one of the issues in light air, if you don't ease off that bolt rope back to where it came from the factory, there's nothing you can do to open the leach. I've seen mains where they're just shut down because of that bolt rope shrinkage. So what you do is unstitch the bolt rope, tie the head up to a tree or something, and literally stretch it back out and let the bolt rope sink its way back up into the luff of the main there. And you end up with a sail that looks a lot better. So be careful of that. If you see too many horizontal wrinkles going up the mast, especially past the window, and that's not due to like having the halyard a few inches down, but that's just there, you know, you need to go with that bolt rope. So just a heads up on that. Jibs, I don't really see a problem. There's no shrinkage in the wire or anything up front. What does happen over time is the midsection of the jib will stretch out a little, so you do get a little more return in the leach when you have that happen, but you're not going to see that in a sail for years on a jib. It'll be a pretty tired jib at that point. So I know a lot of people sail with myriad of different sails and stuff, so you can kind of look at the sail and use these controls to help dial in what you're seeing out on the water. So if I sail, like sometimes down at Coconut Grove, I'll go out on Wednesday night and people have some pretty tired sails. And I'm kind of doing all that stuff as we're preparing the boat. I first look at the luff and then immediately I go at the halyard and say, okay, what do we need to do to get this sail working? And a lot of times we can take something that really is dysfunctional and turn it into something that works pretty nicely, even though some of these sails are 7, 8 years old on the boats. So you can make an old sail go fast, you just have to really reach into your bag of tricks there to get it to work. So fundamentally, the more knowledge you have about how these sails are functioning and the cause and effect between all your controls and rigging systems, the better you are at saying, oh, I need a little bit of this or a little bit of that. The reason we know about the halyard and the rig tension and everything is because we play around with that regularly, and we know the cause and effect down to a T on exactly doing an alteration to the boat, what it does to the sail shapes. How many of you guys here could say that you intimately know that cause and effect relationship with everything on the Scot? So that's one thing that you don't need on the water time to go do. I would say this is a note-taking thing. You reflect upon what you've learned out on the water, and you really want to figure these things out. Because when it's game time, if you know how to dial that boat in, you're much better off. So a big thing out of today is always start asking those questions. Don't just look at a tuning guide, but really understand the fundamentals behind what we're trying to solve with the sail shapes, and coming to some of the conclusions that we've kind of published the settings on. So back to one other thing, your base forestay kind of sets your overall shape for your sail, especially the jib. So if you think about the distance between where you're sheeting and the front wire on the boat, the tighter that wire, the greater the distance between where you're sheeting and that wire is, the flatter the jib.
Do that again.
So let's just say I've got a forestay wire, okay, straight, nice and tension, and I've got a mast. We're not going to go all the way up on the jib, and there's the foot of the jib. The tighter this wire, let's say my trim point is back down here to the seat, there, and then down into the sheet. The distance between your sheeting block and that wire, the tighter your tension, the greater the distance between them. You see how that works?
So what's the effect?
So, because you're taking the sail with shape and you're applying it and stretching it further out, it becomes flatter. So if you think about it, one way to depower your jib as the breeze comes up is to go to higher and higher tensions. You're going to have an overall flatter and flatter jib. We actually change our tension quite a bit between light air and heavy air. We're usually at around 110 on a day like today, less than 5 knots, because we're trying to power up the jib. We're trying to do the opposite. But once we get into an overpowered situation, we're going to start increasing our forestay tension. So we typically jump a pin at a time. So right when we hit about 12 knots, we jump up to probably about 150 pounds. And then when it's blowing over 20, you kind of want to max it out and go up to even 170, 180.
And David, you're talking about having an adjuster extender.
Yeah, we're going to show you over on Jim's boat. We actually added one to his boat this morning, and we'll kind of show you how to set that up. We actually set it for light air. That way you know when you jump up 1 pin or 2 pins, you're coming on that much more on your head stay. You always want to measure it. Sometimes on the trailers when you're underway, they move, the turnbuckle kind of undoes itself. So just be careful and check it from time to time. But the fundamental thing going on there is what's controlling the sail shape, or your distance is there. You can also think it's almost the same thing if you move the car back a little. You're flattening the shape, but you're opening the leach by doing it. So by leaving the car all the way forward, we're still having the leach pretty tight where we can trim it right to the edge of stall, but we're also flattening the overall draft of the sail. So we're making a flatter sail the higher tension we go on our rig.
So you got forestay tension of 90 to 150 pounds, and at that tension, there's not a lot of flexion in that stay.
No, so interestingly enough, if you watch your leeward stay underway, and something like 6 knots, the leeward stays dangling. So your rig tension really doesn't matter once that stays dangling because it's the load of the rig. Okay? So only in light air are you taking up kind of the slack in the leeward shroud. So we see a lot of guys sail, and what they're doing, there is a reason why they're doing it. When they go down to 80 pounds or under 100, the mast tip is going to leeward. Okay, like this. If you have your boat straight up and down at that tension, when you start to load the rig with the wind, it starts to go to leeward. Well, that helps open up the leaches. So it makes a lot of sense that in light air, they're trying to tip the mast to leeward to open up both leaches in the sail. The problem is the second you get to your 10, 12 knots where you need to start hardening those leaches again, they can't, they're stuck. Okay? And so by jumping up tension, you'll be able to bring your leaches in tighter. And they won't. They'll kind of, for super light teams, I've seen like Jeff and Amy Linton, they put it at 80, 90 pounds and leave it there. But we've noticed that when the breeze comes up, Jeff only has a single motor. He can only pinch and feather the boat. He's already maxed out on
Jeff what?
Linton. Have you ever met him? Jeff's a pretty good sailor in flying
What
stuff.
did you say he did?
Oh, so he sails with his rig super light, like 80 pounds. So as the breeze picks up, he's got a lot of head stay sag, and he relies on his vang to tension up, but he's still tipped to leeward. He can't really come out of that pointing mode and drive the boat in heavy air like heavier teams can. So one of the big differences that we do compared to lighter teams is by going up tension, instead of having to feather so much to deal with the excess pressure, we can drive that boat. And if you think about the VMG, we have a faster forward than you are climbing if you're pinching. And so we end up ahead. We're using our weight to our advantage by repowering the boat up longer than the lighter teams. So when Jeff and Amy, they go to the depowered boat almost out of the gate.
G-power boat?
Depowered.
Pardon?
Depowered. Like where you're trying to take pressure out of the sails.
G-power.
No.
D-E, depowered.
Dog.
Not
G-power.
powered.
Thank
Not
you.
powered.
Sorry. I'm listening as hard as I can.
Yeah, it's all right.
No, it's okay. So we're talking in terms of powering up.
Yeah, I got it.
Yep, or depowering.
So why does he do that? Why does he?
Jeff kind of has his own style of how he sails the boat, and he's very effective with it. So a lot of times you don't want to change what works. He's developed his entire way of sailing the boat that way. What we've noticed is a heavier team, we can manage the power a lot longer. So we want to. It's like having a more.
He could too if he From what you're saying, though, if he tensioned up in the heavier winds, it would help him too, right?
He could a little. I think he could power up his rig and not medium air and go faster. And in heavy air, he just needs more weight on the boat. Maybe can only hike so hard. And we kind of use that. I mean, just like they have the advantage in light air, we have the advantage in heavy air. We're going to use it. So the nice thing is by taking some pressure, think about your sails. What do we do on the water when you're overpowered? You start to, like with the weather helm, you're either going to ease the main or you're going to start to feather the boat and bubble the front of the jib a little. You don't want to really bubble the Scot more than about 3-4 inches. If not, you get into that slow pointing mode. And that becomes a problem because you're almost limited on how fast you can make the boat go. Your other option is to put the bow down, but then you can't hold the boat flat and you're sliding because the boat's heeling too much. That's just where I think a lot of people have gone to using the vang excessively because they're using the vang to try to flatten the main out and keep it going. But once you go over that top wind speed that you can handle, you're limited out. You have no more controls to kind of go with. If you take a little bit of a different approach where we're trying to take pressure out of the jib by flattening it with increasing the head stay, and that's helping us manage the amount of helm we have. When I don't have so much power in the jib, I can put my bow down a little bit more than the other guys can. That allows me to trim my main a little harder, and then adding the vang to shut down the leach, I'm able to control how much heel I'm putting in the boat, how much power is in the boat.
So I'd like to know what you just said.
Okay. So by flattening the jib, you're depowering the jib. That's allowing you, instead of having to feather and point the boat so much in big breeze, be able to bring down the bow. Now your final control on really managing shape is by doing that. Normally people add vang pretty tight as they get overpowered, and that's their method of depowering. They flatten the main out with the vang by bending the boom and bending the mast down at the gooseneck. What we're doing is a little different. We're setting up the sails to be outright flatter, which has less power and breeze as we go up tension.
By tensioning
The rig, yes. And then finally, what we do is our leach is too twisty at that point. Okay, we have to shut it down with the vang. So instead of looking at vang as like a depowering mechanism, we're looking at it as a leach control mechanism. So when you spill the upper part of your leach, we're talking in 15 to 20 knots here. If you have no vang on, everyone's seen their main, it just flies off and even lumps. It's not doing you any good. So by adding vang, you're actually re-shutting down that leach. Okay, and you get it just to the right point where you have the balance between powering the boat. So if I shut down my leach more, my boat's going to heel more and build more help. I'm going to be forced to then feather more in my steering and really be aggressive on the hiking to keep the boat going. So by setting up the boat the way we're doing with more tension, I can ease off on that vang a little, spill the upper, and try to maintain my flat sail shapes with the main and the jib. You've seen in the notes, we ease our halyard off on the main quite a bit and ram the cutting ham on, and we're taking away sail area from the sail. So our big thing in 15 to 20 knots, if you think, if I'm able to take 3 inches from the leach of the sail up the entire sail, it's probably a good 1.5 to 2 meters of sail area I'm taking away from the main. So we call it kind of like a mini reef where we really dial down that main, and in order to keep the draft and everything in the same place, we add the cutting ham back on. So if we drop our main 3 inches, we add our cutting ham 3 inches. We're not actually tensioning the cutting ham.
Right.
So now we've got a sail that, again, allows us to steer more in the groove. Instead of being over feathered with our steering, now we can get that boat to where it's locked in on the telltales, even in 15 to 20 knots.
How do you change your rig tension? You can't change down the water.
No, you have to select it on land.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask that very
Yeah.
question. If
So-
this is between races out on the water?
Yeah.
But,
You do it
No,
before
you can't do it on the water.
okay.
That's forbidden.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
On land, you kind of need to go with it for the day. So, I mean, it's a rough setting. You can go heavier or lighter on it to help out. Like, for example, if we were racing today, I'd be down at 100 pounds or less, right in that range. But like tomorrow, they're showing 15, maybe a little bit more in the afternoon there. I'd probably jump it up to about 130, 140 pounds and be right in the middle of what we're expecting. And it definitely helps out a lot. We've gone out and I could fully power up the boat, and even at 400 pounds, we can't hike it down with it fully powered up. We tighten up our halyard, our forestay a little bit, and we go ahead and we drop the main, and suddenly we can keep that boat right at 7 degrees all the way up through 20 knots. And once you get over 20, they'll start calling the racing. They're not going to sail you much more than that. So it's a nice way of extending that upper range of what you can sail the boat in. And I know Ryan's kind of working on a new main where the main's outright smaller for light teams. You've probably heard of it. And supposedly that's going to help out a lot in sailing the boat even in over 20 knots. Yeah, so they want to be able to sail it even with light teams and all the way up to 20 plus.
So, do you do anything with the jib card? Does that influence flattening the jib at all?
No, so unless it's blowing over 20, you don't move the cards back. They're pretty much pinned all the way forward the entire time. Unless you have a different cut of jib that requires it, you're going to be cards forward always. Yeah, when you can no longer hike it down and you think you have a little too much inversion in the main, ever knows what the inversion off the jib kind of looks like, that's when you might want to back the car out. You're going to sacrifice a little bit of pointing, but you're going to create a bigger gap there in the slot, and you're going to be able to sail the boat much nicer probably. We don't pick up the centerboard heavier at all. We've tried that out. You end up just losing height. So it's better just to leave it down all the way and just manage the pressure of the boat instead. So that's kind of what we're doing in the boat throughout the entire range. And light air, we're really looking with our halyard tensions, with our rig tension to make the sails fuller, more powerful. We want to put as much horsepower into the boat as we can. And then the second we hit that D-power range, we start going through our settings on incrementally. We know how to dial the boat back down to where it should be in 20 knots.
Outhaul?
Usually, so we've got the outhaul pretty tight in light air. We don't strap it to where it's as hard as it possibly can go. Kind of back it off maybe a half inch. We sail like that pretty much through the range until we get overpowered, and then we strap it down all the way. But that's very sail dependent. I know the Norse have a much wider groove on that control. So I've seen with the Norse, you're playing with the outhaul quite a bit more. Like you're easing it off in the lighter breezes to try to power up, and then in heavy air, they're really cranking it on to try to reduce the draft at the foot of that main. It's really baggy down low. A lot of power there. So we do have a document out there on all the control settings. If anyone doesn't have any of the documentation, let us know, give us your email, and we'll send you that whole thing. Because it's all been written about in detail in the notes guides, and that should help you out a lot.
Is that beyond the tuning guide that's online?
There's a lot, there's like 10 different documents. One of them is, I've got to pull up the title, but I'll make sure you get it if you don't have it. So does anyone have any questions about kind of what we're trying to do with the sails in different breezes? Does anyone have any stories of where they've run into something that they couldn't solve, or you name it, on their boat?
I was going to ask, and you're sailing the flat cut jib, well, the tight rig jib, right?
We use the snug rig.
You use the snug jib.
Yeah, and in super light air, we do jump to the tight rig, but that's only recommended for super heavy teams. For our discussion today, I would say only put it in terms of the one jib.
So you're running the snug rig in heavier air, you're running the snug rig jib at 150 pounds?
Yeah, 20 knots, yeah, about that. And we can run the snug all the way to the bottom just like everyone else. We can use it in two.
Right.
We just prefer having a little more sail on board for the super light stuff. That's why we change it out. But you could effectively, like if I was sailing with someone that was 150 instead of 200 pounds as a crew, I probably wouldn't use the other jib. We'd probably just go with the snug through the whole range. So remember on the water there, does anyone remember from the notes what you're looking for on how to set the jib and the main up when you're out sailing? Okay? And then when you round up and you sail close hauls, you'll have the appropriate halyard tension on your jib. The main works the same way. You want to sail downwind at that lowest possible angle with the jib, and then you want to look at the amount of horizontal wrinkles going up the main. We like to see wrinkles up to about the sail window, but no higher. And then when you round up, the leech will be right in the right position where you want it to be. The good thing about tuning this way is it's dependent on pressure. So the lighter it gets, the more you're going to dial down your halyards, which goes in line with opening your leeches. So we say that this is a very effective way of setting up the boat because it works in any breeze because it's relative to the amount of pressure in the sail. So in 10 knots, you're obviously going to be tighter on your halyards to adjust the amount of wrinkles. As the pressure increases in the sail, it'll increase the amount of wrinkles at the crow's feet on the jib hanks and on the luff of the main. And in heavy air, we're kind of taking those out. So if you think about it in that I want to power up mode, you want to barely see those wrinkles form. And that way you know you're maximizing the amount of bag and pressure the sail will produce when you trim it correctly. And then in heavy air, you're trying to take that away. You're saying, okay, I want to depower a little. So you're taking those wrinkles away. When we sail in about 12 knots, we have no more crow's feet in the jib. And on the main, we still have a few wrinkles. Once we get to 15, we start eliminating all wrinkles in the main with a little bit of cutting cam. And then once we're truly overpowered above 15, we start to drop the entire main and change the profile and get rid of some power that way.
But you're still, through all those conditions, you're doing this downwind, how you're doing it.
Yeah. In 20, in 15 to 20, you're probably looking at it a little more close haul. Like if you come up and obviously you have too many wrinkles, make the adjustment. Don't just go on the one dimension sailing it downwind. But definitely in light air, sailing downwind, that's what we do to set it up. Does anyone have any questions?
So do you go as far downwind as you can?
So I'll show you how to do that. With the Scot, you've got your jib and your main kind of going along here. So if you've got your jib and your main, let's say our wind's kind of out of this direction. If you head too deep, the first sail that's going to collapse is the jib. The jib's going to try to flop in the slot. You know you're sailing too deep the second that starts to happen. So the Scot's kind of got a limited lower angle based on pressure in both sails. If you think about it, if the jib collapses, it's doing really good. And so you're sailing at a lower angle and you're going to watch your boat speed. If you have a GPS on board, you're going to watch it drop really quickly. So right when you hit this angle where you heat it back up a little and the jib refills, you'll see almost a 1.5 knot difference in the boat speed. And you're only changing your angle a couple degrees. So there's that sweet spot where you want to sail the boat as deep as you can to that boundary. But the second your jib starts to collapse to weather, you know you've gone. So even with the spinnaker up, we're doing the same thing. We're using our jib. We actually don't sail with a telltale or a wind pennant. So we have no indication other than the jib of where to steer the boat downwind. And we're using that jib as our indicator. Again, the reason we like doing that is it's a very dynamic control. Let's say you hit a puff, jib's got a little more pressure, then you can sail lower, but that stall point will always be where the jib kind of starts to come to weather. You can get away with sailing it lower for a little while, maybe 10, 20 volt lengths, but if you continuously sail too low of an angle, you're definitely going to lose out to the boats that are sailing with better pressure. So that's kind of a trick to the Scot on sailing off wind, is really use the jib as an indicator, even if you have a wind pennant, so look at where the wind's coming from. And this works really well, especially like if you think about it in heavy air. Sometimes you can take the boat almost dead downwind, and your jib won't collapse. It'll still have pressure in it. The other nice thing is think about transitional sailing. You go from a puff to a lull. That jib's going to tell you how much to heat it up. And also, if you get a lift downwind, you're also going to have to heat it up quite a bit. So we're always making adjustments based on what the jib's doing in the slot downwind.
So you're doing that when you're flying the spinnaker too? You're using the jib to...
We do something different than most teams downwind. I'm the skipper and I fly the kite 100% of the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we did that for several reasons. If you think about it, if the crew's flying the kite and the skipper's steering the boat, who's looking back? Who's looking for pressure, the other boat's the positioning? So you're kind of sailing blind. And what we did is we said, okay, downwind, we really like sailing the boat on its best water line, which is again that 7-degree angle. So in lighter conditions, we're heeling the boat to leeward to get to that 7 degrees because your aspect ratio on the bottom gets improved quite a bit. And on top of that, since we're sailing heel to leeward, I can easily then set the bull height and the bull angle because both controls are led back to me as the skipper. And so I've got controls easily right there. And then on the leeward, if we're sailing at the right angle, I can sail the spinnaker really effectively. And so PJ, instead of looking at the spinnaker, now he's making tactical calls from behind. He's judging where the pressure is better. So he's telling me whether to go into a high or low mode based on where he thinks the pressure is better. And if you have a group of boats covering each other, he's calling where the clear lane is. And he's also calling tactics on whether to jibe or not because he can see the incoming puffs coming down. We've improved drastically off the wind by switching our roles downwind like that. I think in heavy air and sometimes in super, super light air, you might want to give it back to the crew. But we strictly sail downwind with the skipper flying kite these days. The other nice thing is PJ actually can play the centerboard. If you think about it, if you're sailing the boat and you want to heat up a little, you probably want to drop the board a couple inches because that's going to help the boat bite as it turns instead of sliding. So if you have the blade up all the way and you go to heat up, have you ever seen how the Scot will just continue sliding sideways? So it's good to play the blade, and then when we finally get a nice puff, PJ can pick it up. So PJ's responsibility is not only on tactics, he's also doing stuff in the boat. So I'm setting the bang and setting the main sheet, and typically I'll trim it in heavier air just off the shroud, and in lighter air, if you're heating it up a lot, your angle is going to change on your main, so you're going to have to cheat it in quite a bit. But remember, I'm not really dealing with the weather guy. I'm steering and I've got the spinnaker sheet. I'm almost sailing it like you would sail a 49er. I'm steering behind my back with my, let's say I'm on starboard here. I'm sailing behind my back here with the tiller, and then I'm sheeting, and if I need to change the sheet, all I'll do is I'll rotate my tiller hand with my sheeting hand, adjust the main sheet, and then go right back. We're also using our weight placement aggressively off the wind. If you think about heating the boat up, I think a lot of people do it too flat. They've got the boat flat and they use the rudder to turn the boat, so the boat slows down a lot. The better way to do that is to allow the boat to heel, put the blade down a little. Now you're creating helm by doing that. The boat naturally wants to head up, so the end result is you use a lot less rudder. And so as we sail today, we're really going to be watching about how aggressively the teams are using their weight placement to get the boat to do what it naturally wants.
So you're saying to head up, you're going downwind with the spinnaker, and you can see a puff coming or something, you want to head up and get to it, or you're trying to direct some boats or something, you'll actually drop the board a little bit, and heel the boat a little bit, and let it naturally come up from that rather than messing with the rudder.
If you think about it, the second you go and use too much rudder there, it's acting like a brake, so you're getting a lot of drag off the rudder, and it definitely slows you down.
Okay.
Plus, I think the boat, when you do it with the helm, naturally turns on its proper arc. So if you think about it as a skipper, if you have no indication of how much the boat's powering up, it's really hard to guess exactly how you want to steer the boat there. You're kind of blind. Sometimes, like if we're really heeled flat or even the weather, and we get a big lift, your tiller kind of goes weird on you where you don't know how much to heat it back up. So by going back to the leeward side, letting the boat come up, you're going to feel right where that pressure re-engages with the sails, and you're going to be much more precise. Plus, because you're using less rudder, you're not slowing the boat down at all. And it's the opposite on the bear off. So if you pressure up, you're going to want to bring your weight out, flatten the boat, and then steer down. If you think about it, if you just try to steer down, you're really now fighting the helm quite a bit. So that's an indicator. All the skippers out there, if you feel excess helm through your boat handling or in breeze, it's telling you that you're doing something wrong or there's something wrong with the setup of the boat. We see that a lot where you, like on a bear away, think about it in 15 knots, we're going to see this on Saturday coming around the weather mark. If you don't unload the boat by easing the sails and tightening out, it's all rudder from there, and you're really going to slow the boat down trying to bear off with just the rudder. So we've got a lot of film footage where people are easing the sails and using a lot of rudder, but they're not tightening out enough to really get the boat to spin down. Does everyone remember back to their junior sailing days and the Sunfish laser, boats like that? It was all weight placement. You really had to, in order to turn a laser at a weather mark, you have to really be aggressive, tightening it out and down. Now what's funny is, a laser, the boat weighs pretty much less than the crew. And so the crew really has the ability to spin it. In a Scot, it's even harder. Scot's 800 pounds and you're either 300 to 400 pounds is your weight. You really have to be hyper aggressive to steer an 800 pound boat away that's kind of loaded up. So we always say, unload the boat first, hike out second, and then finally turn the boat third. If you think about it, if you hike out and the boat's loaded, the boat's not going to change its angle in the water at all. But if you ease out those sails, the boat's going to want to respond with the heel, and that's going to change your helm and then allow you to do the bear.
So when you do that, does the rudder even turn?
It does. You still have to turn the
So
rudder.
you just,
Drastic improvements on your sailing game if you go out there and you're really disciplined, minimize rudder, and then put the rest of it together. What's interesting is the first time you go to do your boat handling like this, you're probably going to overdo it or underdo it and make mistakes. Don't give up on it because it's easy to go back to your old way of doing things. This is probably something you want to work on and practice and build up to. So even though in a regatta, you might revert this weekend to the way you've been sailing the boats for the last couple of years, it's going to take a little bit of time to put this all together and start integrating it into your boat handling. But it's highly effective. PJ would say it's like if we had to rate a percentage of importance in the race, we'd say boat handling is at least 40%, if not more, of winning races. Obviously, you've got to have good starts, you've got to go the right way on the course. But then from there, where do you really make up a lot of the boat lengths? I mean, it's at the marks where one boat's going slow and the other boat's not.
What's the other 60%?
So we would say boat speed's actually less than 10%. Okay, tactics are up there with the boat handling at like 40, 50%. And a lot of it then is the intangibles of where you are in the lane, calling puffs, things like that for the rest of it. But so to kind of prove that, let's say we sailed off in a straight line on the lake. That sailor, worst sailor out there, what do you think the total gap in the two boats after sailing halfway across the lake is? Maybe 5-10 boat lengths?
Well, that's where I'm usually at.
Yeah. So if you think about that in a race by the weather mark, that you're basically saying nobody should ever be more than 20 boat lengths behind the lead. In boat speed alone, if boat speed was the prime thing to look at in winning races. So it's usually not. A lot of times we get to the weather mark and the trailing boat's a third of the leg back or sometimes even more. After a couple laps, that gap gets quite large. It's almost 50% distance and time. So if the lead boat's finishing in 30 minutes, the last boat sometimes is finishing 45 minutes out. So where does that all come from? A lot of it we think is going the wrong way. Obviously you don't want to sail on headers upwind and lifts downwind. So you can give away a lot of distance compared to boat speed there, and the rest of it is just good, clean boat handling. Think about this, if I come around the leeward mark and I'm pressured up because I made the correct arc in and out, so now because I'm coming through a close reach angle up to a close hull, I should be pressured up more than I would at close hull. That allows me to either work the boat high if I'm on a lift, or if we're headed out of the mark, I'm immediately going to go into a roll tack. And because I'm pressured up, everyone knows it's easier to roll tack when you have more pressure. You always want to tack in the puffs if you can, okay? Because it's easier to do an up pressure tack, you're going to lose less speed. So by having this executed correctly, I can parlay it into my tactics.
Okay, so tacking a puff, that means you're going to be headed in the puff.
Not necessarily.
Well, if you're headed in a puff, you're going to tack.
Ideally, yes.
Okay, so you've lost a lot of boat speed the instant that header hits you. Do you first fall off, build the boat speed back up and then tack, or do you just go with it as soon as you feel it?
So if I feel the boat's not set up right, it depends. It's a tough answer because let's say it's a 30-degree shift, immediately go. Because you're going to have to bear off so much to get the boat going, you're probably going to lose more speed doing that than just throwing in the tack even though you weren't ready for it. Now if it's like 5 degrees and you feel that knock took a lot of pressure out of the boat, I would re-accelerate the boat. I'd bear the boat off for that couple degrees, maybe give it a pump or two to try to re-pressure the rig and get it to the right balance going into the tack, and then allow the helm and keel so I'm not using too much rudder. So if we think about it, I'll hit on this concept as well, is there's two ways to generate the right amount of heel. You can do it with your weight placement, and in breeze you can do it with the sail trim. So some of the times in like 10 to 15 knots, what I'll do right before attack is I'll load up the boat a little by pumping the main once or twice. What that does is it increases the amount of pressure in the rig and it's going to increase the heel a little. Well, because I've done that, now I can turn the boat quicker up into the tack. And so there's a perfect setup. If you heel too much, the boat's going to want to turn too quickly. And if you're too flat, now you're having to use rudder to turn the boat. So there's an ideal heel to go into attack in every breeze. And the best way to think about it is if you're in depowered situations or underpowered situations and you're looking for power, you're going to want to do that with your weight placement. And if you're in an overpowered situation, you're going to want to do it with your main. So in 20 knots, I don't need to send my weight in, if you think about it, to get the right heel. All I'm going to do is trim in the main a little, heel the boat up, and now I'm ready for the tack where I want it to be. In light air, if I go to trim the main, it's probably going to stall the main, and it's going to actually flatten the boat. So you've got to move weight in first in light air when you're underpowered. So use your weight and light wind to get the right heel going into the tack, and then heavier use the main so you can do it.
You said turn too fast. What's or too slow? What's the right? How do you find the middle?
So if you think about the boat rotating through the tack from close hold up into the wind, the more time you spend from when the jib luffs to when it's on the new side, you're decelerating. So you want to minimize the time in that no-go range where the boat's not going to be sailing. You can take your time getting up to the point in which you release your jib. At that point in time, you want to increase the rotation in the boat. So that's when you really start to throw your weight out. This is like the essence of a roll tack. You even backwind the jib and you increase the amount of rudder over all at the same time to get the boat to sail through that range where it's going to be decelerating as quickly as possible. So typically the more you roll, the more you backwind, and the more you kind of add rudder. You don't want to, remember, we want to minimize the rudder. So we're very aggressive on our roll, very aggressive on backwinding, and we both do it exactly in unison to get the boat to throw over. Then once it's over, then we start to bring weight back to weather as the boat pressures up on the tack. So we're, again, back to the philosophy, we're minimizing rudder, we're maximizing what we can do with the sail and our weight placement through the boat handling. Now, when you start to get overpowered in a depowered situation, you're worried about flipping the boat, right, out of the tack. So you're then taking away how much you put into it. You don't have to roll as hard, and you don't have to backwind as hard in overpowered situations. And you're nice and easy at that point. In 20 knots, we actually don't even attempt to do a roll tack. It's all timing on crossing. So if you think about it, you still want to assist the boat turning as long as you can. So we actually stay on the weather rail past head the wind and then go. Most people go the second they push the tiller. And there's a problem with that. You're over-generating leeward heel, so the boat's going to want to head up really quickly. But then at that point, the boat doesn't want to turn down on the new tack because you're already flattened coming out of the tack. You want a little bit of heel, so you're heading back up as you re-engage the main jib. We'll show you visual examples out here with the breeze today. We'll throw in some roll tacks and show you what we're talking about there. So a lot of stuff there to cover, but again, what I'm trying to really get down to is the core skill here is you can walk your way with your team through any of the boat handling stuff and really figure out how much of each one of these things you want to add or take away depending on the breeze. But if you're not talking in this lingo or language, then you're probably not solving the problems. So there's always problems to be solved on the water and nuances to get better. And it really comes down to doing this type of work, talking out, having questions, and then reviewing. We really like to bring the cameras in the boat so you can see everything these days. Eric's done a good job of getting some of that film footage back out. But I would say almost everybody should go buy a GoPro, put it on their boat, because midweek you can look at that footage and determine what you're doing right and wrong in the boat. And it's almost like it's really hard to see yourself in the third person. Having that camera on board allows you to do all that. And then you can increase the amount you're taking away from sailing a session. You go sailing, you capture your data from your GoPro, and you watch the film footage. You come back, you put a little time in there on saying, hey, what are we doing right and wrong? Next time you sail, that cycle happens again and again and again. You get better quicker and quicker. So it's one of the big keys there is you really want to sail against somebody else, so you're baselining, and you want to gain as much information as you can using the cameras, and even PJ's got a drone and Eric's got a drone. If you're lucky enough to see the outside stuff, you can see the leaches of the sail, the draft of the sail. So when you're doing speed testing type things, you want those cameras so you can look and see if you're doing it right. Professional boats out there, they send drones up in the air and they're scanning their sails every day to look for the minutest little thing that they're doing wrong. And they make big improvements. They make very few mistakes on sail trim, sail design, all that stuff. Where in the Scot, we don't get a lot of time with that. We kind of just go with the tuning guide and go sailing. But get some feedback out on the water. It's going to help a lot. So today, this is doing exactly what they predicted, which was just variable pretty much all day. So we're going to make the best of it. We're going to kind of extend the on-land lectures a little bit. Jim Crabtree's got his boat over here, and what I kind of want to do is go over to the boat, go over all the rigging stuff if you guys have any questions about anything that we do rigging the Scot or tuning the Scot. And I think, who here has a regular loose gauge? I think Jim here has it's like a European one.
I got one.
Yeah, let's see what the numbers look like. I'm actually curious to see if the gauges are different at all in the readings between what you're seeing. Does anyone have any questions about the rake and tuning setup before we go ahead and go over there? Yes.
On the rake, when you make your measurements to the aft corner, you got an inch or so, depending on how you hook your tape up to the shackle and where that shackle is going in or out of the block on the top.
So in the sheet, the thing will stick straight out in the back. And when I tension my tape measure, I pull it back down a little. But when I do pulling it up, I go 100% so it's tight in there, so it's accurate. I think if it's got some play in there, you're introducing that play, even though it's turning the shiv better down in the back of the boat. So top of the mast here, you've got a block or shiv. The halyard comes around that and down. What they're saying in some of the tunings, if you crank this, the shackle's going to sit straight out like that. And so when you measure, you're getting a bad measurement to the back of the
shackle. Why is the shackle sticking out?
Because you're cranking it so tight into the block there.
Oh, because you're cranking it the block. Oh,
but I actually like to do that because when I pull on my tape measure, I'm pulling this back down, so it's up all the way, metal on metal. And when I turn it on the shiv there, I'm not getting a false reading, so I flex down on the tape a little bit, and you get an accurate reading.
Okay, so you're not concerned at all about this with the swag. The swag is already on; it's up in there and damaging the player in it.
Yeah, I crank it all the way in the measure. I'll actually go do it on the boat. Just
Out
show
of
you guys.
curiosity, why wouldn't you go without an inch and change your measurements an inch?
You're going to turn yourself off.
Dave, do you use the jib halyard method?
Yeah, there is. So on the forestay here, people are marking their forestays, and then there's a measurement down to the deck. I found that if you measure 5 different boats, they're all different. So it's good to measure both. I kind of like this one because I know my geometry between the top of the mast and the back of the boat.
So I play around with my rake a lot, and one of the things I've noticed is you have the shiv like this, and the shackle can come up like this, or the shackle can go like that.
I keep a little tension on it when I put it up.
So
it sits on.
So you want it to be perpendicular to the housing of the shiv.
Yeah. The good thing about the Scot is we're shooting for really an inch range. So throughout all the winds, you don't change the rate in this boat. We've tried it, and it's not effective.
True.
So we've gone from as far forward as 2810 all the way back to 23, 22.
Okay.
And they both don't work.
So when you change your, say you sail light over regatta today, and tomorrow it's heavy, and you change your load by changing your forestay tension, your rake is the same basically because the shrouds are so much heavier than the forestay.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Yeah. Once you have those side stays kind of loaded a little, they don't stretch.
So you don't muck with your shroud settings at all?
No. No need to. So we recommend putting the boat right between these two. And if you're off a little bit, it's not going to make a big difference. I wouldn't want to get much further forward than 28.7 and not further back than 25.
Performance-wise, what would you see if you were out of spec?
So if you're really far forward, the boat's not going to point. Kind of like a windsurfer where you throw the rig a little.
Not going to point. So
Yeah, it's going to point. The boat's going to want to point. It's going to be really hard to point for other boats with it too far forward, just because of the leach geometry of the sails. Now, the same thing happens when you're too far back, but it's for a different reason. When you're too far back, you're generating less pressure in the sails, so the boat won't float and point as easily. So, again, you go too far back, you're going to have trouble pointing because you're not going to be generating pressure. And if you're too far forward, it's going to have the wrong leach angle, so you're going to, again, not point.
Why are you not generating pressure? What's the physics there that you're
So
not generating pressure?
if by raking back, you're opening the leach a little bit, and so in doing so, you're spilling wind.
Right.
Really, in big breeze, you should be able to get away with raking back, but we found out that you just lose height. You don't really gain any forward speed. The Scot seems to have the terminal velocity that upwind, it doesn't like to go much quicker.
Yeah.
So even though you're opening the leach, you're just now having to sail a slightly lower angle. So it's kind of interesting. The outcomes are the same. You point lower if you're misraked, but they're for different reasons. So one of the keys you kind of hinted on is you rake too far back and you're not generating pressure in the main of the jib, you're going to have trouble pointing. So back to our initial discussion, if you're really focused on the amount of flow in the upper part of the sail and not over trim or not at the right keel, you're going to pressure up before the other boats because it's going to have to be pointing speed. It's going to go up quicker comparatively. So we can put two boats in the water and wait until after launch, but I want one boat to purposely sail dead flat. The other boat to sail at 7 and watch the pointing differences from offshore here and stuff. The good thing about today is we can do a lot of tinkering because we don't have breeze. And I'd like everyone to just really get a good visual understanding of what's going on with the boats. And then relate it back to what we're talking about here on the whiteboard. Any questions? I think it's
Just out of curiosity, so, I'm adjusting the rate for helm. Because both different, sales get old, whatever, and you're telling me not to do that.
Well, remember,
and where else do I want to
we
be?
have a whole bag of tricks like we were
Yeah.
talking about with the rig tension as well as the halyard tensions that we can adjust for the halyard as well. There's also, if you think about it, the more you heel, the more halyard you're generating.
Right, yes.
Also, your rudder angle affects your helm. The further the rudder's kicked back, the more helm is going to jerk. And you're right, so if you're raked too far back, it's going to try to head up. If you're raked too far forward, it's going to try to bear off. So you can use that slightly as a helm balancing mechanism. But my bet is your heel and your rudder angle have a lot more to do with your helm situation in the rig.
Are you running your rudder standing or have it more?
3 3/4 is where we're at from the straight edge down from the rudder head out to the tip.
I think that's the standard, right?
At the factory, they do 3 1/4. We're a little bit more than factory. So, good breakdown. You go.
You talked about different percentages. I've heard you talk a lot about weight and how you can reduce weight. How much do you think that makes a difference then?
With the boat, or?
Yeah, like,
So if your boat's heavy, I mean,
well, you talk about like a lighter spinnaker pull, or there's some other little things that you can lose a half pound.
good point. Well, we're seeing the sensitivity in the Scot is having the weight forward of the boat. So if you think about, if we go put the boat in the water and it's laying dead flat, it's really wide right at the shroud points. And so you really want to get that boat, part of the boat out of the water as much as you can. So if you think about it, if we're heeling the boat at 7 and you're trying to get the bow to come up a little bit by moving all of your gear back in the boat, you're now getting that most efficient water line out of the water as much as you can. So you're reducing surface area there and you're reducing a bad shape.
So you're moving weight aft.
Yes.
Later.
In all areas. We find that the Scotland plane is like a non-west wind has all the way on. So right when you're getting to that semi-training condition, the boat with a lighter bow is going to you put all your gear in the back. And even things like lifting your pole little changes the geometry and lift of the spinnaker. And a lot of times having the pole too low in breeze presses that bow down, just lifting the pole a little, lifting the centerboard a little, now it wants to get up and down.
What wind is it starting to play? Plane intense.
Yeah. Some of the later teams will start to get there. But typically, like, yeah, it's all more. And then it'll blast off. I think the fastest we probably have our Scot up to on a run in 15, 18 months. somewhere in there. And so planing, not planing is a good 2 knots difference in boat speed. So if you get it to pop and go on the plane, you're just 100 yards in the minute.
So you use your deck as an indication of 7-degree side-to-side heel. What do you use fore and aft as an indicator?
You feel it. You're always feeling it. What you have to feel it. There's no indicator that you can. I mean, you can use a level of gauge for the heel, but forward and aft, you have to feel the trip on the boat. So if the boat feels like it's pressing the bow down, if you think about it, your centerboard might be too far down, you might have your weight too far forward, your spinnaker might actually be too low, creating more of a downforce in the kite. It's usually a combination of all three. Like when we hit big pressure and puffs, we scoot our weight all the way back, probably pick up the centerboard another couple inches, and if we really think the boat's still sticking at that point, we'll pull up a little bit. We'll raise the guy. The guy with a copy. We'll raise it up a little bit. So yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of different controls out there you can take advantage of.
You got
So cool, let's take 15, and then we'll meet over by Jim's boat, and we'll go.
Have you ever done anything with the centerboard roller on the back?
Oh, so all the way down, if this is the arch,
Yeah.
and then it flattens out there.
Yeah.
Most people will roll it just to the back of the arch. It's got to be quite a bit further back. And I'll actually show you guys in the water, as well as putting stopper knots in the right place where all the way down is. So we put ours down, I roll it all the way back so I can see a little bit of gap between the leading edge of the centerboard and the centerboard trunk. And then I'll slowly roll it back forward until it's just barely touching. Then I'll set my up line and put a knot so it's all the way down, all the way down.
That gap you're talking about down at the bottom.
Yeah, you have to
so
look
you're looking
through,
down through
yeah.
there.
Yeah. You have to look through your daylight down through the centerboard trunk. And then it's set pretty much right, and you can put a mark because your line sometimes when it wraps differently. So you want to put a mark on the centerboard trunk with all the way down.
Now we're going to start with the jib.
So lecture 2.0 at the Decatur inaugural regatta here. And so what we're going to be going over is pretty much how we rig the boat. I'm going to point out a lot of details, so you're going to want to huddle in pretty close on some of these things. We're going to throw up the jib. We're probably not going to throw up the main, but I'm going to go into how we rig the jib sheets, how we rig the spinnaker, where the jib cars are, pretty much all the rigging systems and control lines in the boat, and exactly what each thing is for, stopper knots, where we set them, pretty much everything. I want to make sure. So Jim's got a little bit of a unique setup here compared to most Scots. He's actually made himself a little boot here on top of his tape for chafe guard. I kind of like it. It's a little piece of wetsuit material. It looks like he sewed it, and it fits really nicely, and this allows you to gain access to your settings without having to retape. You probably could get away with just taping the very bottom and then using the boot, because you don't have the problem here, but in Florida we're always dealing with salt water, and you never want to have salt water remain in the fitting. So you always want this to dry out when you're done sailing for the weekend. Hose it off really good, make sure it dries out, that way you'll have no corrosion on your swage ends for your shrouds. So we're going to put that back. I like that. Nice new upgrade. We may do something like this to our boat down south. So typically here, he's got the lifting ring, and this is just for stability. Some of the boats take this off altogether. I think on ours we don't have it, but this is here for your lifting bridle to keep the boat from rolling in the air. So we're going to go to the forestay first here, and we're going to show everybody kind of how we set this up. I'm going to remove the tape and we'll retape it. Where is your tape? I see it. So Jim taped this up, and we're going to untape it to show everybody kind of what we've done here. So everybody knows underneath the deck here, you have a toggle where your jib wire and your forestay are attached on a T-plate down in there. So at the T-plate, normally when you add in this 3-hole extender here, this allows you to change your rig tension very easily. Instead of having to crawl underneath the boat every day, up in there and undo the wire and then go ahead and adjust the turnbuckle, this allows you to kind of set this for the light air setting at your furthest pin out and then jump pins to go up tension. So it's a nice addition, even though you're adding a plate and a little bit of chafe area here on this. If you tape it up, it's not going to be an issue. So what we normally do, and we did it this morning to his boat, is I climbed down there, undid the wire, and we preset the tension here to the light air setting, and you're at 110 pounds, I believe, on the forestay. Everyone can get a feel on this if they want for the amount of tension you're feeling, but that's a pretty good light air setup, and we're anticipating sailing today. And for tomorrow, all we'd have to do is jump the hole up to tighten up the rig and flatten out our jib a little bit. So again, you've got to climb under there to set this once, but then it becomes easy to deal with the different tensions in the different conditions. Couple safety things down in there. You've got your safety wire, and there's also a nut to lock out the turnbuckle. You always have to remember to turn the nut tight and make sure it's seated well. If not, that nut will back itself off, and then the turnbuckle can move, and then your tension will change. So just make sure you have that. So one of the things when we rig the jib then from here, I'm going to go ahead and tape this back up. Does everyone see this? I recommend everyone putting in a 3-hole plate there.
Dave, I got it.
You got that, I'll just take this off. Go ahead.
So how much tension is increase?
About 30 to 40 pounds. Depending on where you drilled them or the spacing, we've noticed on our boat, we jump from about 120 to 150, 55. And so we're in that range. We've got 2 holes and then we jump way up for a different setting. So that's what you've got going on there. On his, we actually bottomed out on the turnbuckle, so we couldn't go as low as we wanted to with this wire. We'd have to look at maybe either cutting the suede shorter, or, I mean, it was so close, we just jumped up a pinhole instead of going soft on the tension. Another thing on rigging, does everyone see the lower end of the jib tack here? You actually can run the forestay through here, because you can't run the swage through this, there's not enough distance. But when you have the mast down, you can run the tail end of this out of the turnbuckle and back down through the center. That's ideal, but usually when we rig the jib, we end up putting the shackle on like this. And that's like a second best. And this puts the tack right close to the forestay and centered. If you have it off here and you don't put this on, this tends to float out here and it changes the foot of the jib. So as I go ahead and rig this really quickly, pull this out. Good. I'm going to put one leg on each side to strap the jib. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put the tack right on just like that. And then snap it down. Everyone see that? How we're doing that? Yep. Next thing we do is just attach all the hanks. Ryan's got the clip-ins and North has the buttons. They're pretty much the same. Everyone kind of see how I'm trapping the jib between my legs here? If you're ever doing this on the boat, this is a really good technique to keep the jib from going in the water. Good thing about a flying Scot is we're pretty much halfway rigged. So got all our hanks on here.
I got a question.
Yep.
We're talking about the jib tension, the forestay tension. How do you balance getting the forestay tension right and the rake right?
So you've got side stay pinholes
Yeah.
that you set first, and then as you're getting toward your tension range, if these were too high on the side stay, my rake would be too far forward on the rig. And even though I got to the same tension here, the mast would be out of alignment. So what you do there is you lower the side stay pins down, bring the rake back, and then as you load this up, you should get to about the right spot. The good thing is Tyler's from factory side stay chain plates are of almost ideal to where they need to be. So if you rake too far back,
So you mess with it.
yeah, no, once you set it, it's
Yeah,
done.
no, but once
Yeah.
but getting it right the first time,
Yeah.
you mess with it.
Yes.
You go back and forth.
Yes.
Are you twisted?
Yeah. Can take a peek up into the sun. I can't see anything.
You gotta go around.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yep. Check to make sure you have no wraps, and then finally just go ahead and lock this one in. So we're going to go up with the jib really quickly. I'm actually going to take out. No, I'm going to leave on the blocks. So normally, up until about 15 knots, we go 1-to-1 with the jib, and this is a 2-to-1 setup with your blocks here. So just for the sake of it today, we're going to rig it 2-to-1. But to take this out, you just take off your 2 blocks here, and then typically you're going to switch out a different jib sheet for light air. We have a spliced and tapered one, so what we're trying to do is get rid of all the weight holding the jib down in light air. You can imagine today, these blocks in the line are pulling that leech shut. And so what we talked about this morning was making sure that you had flow in the upper third portion of your jib. We went to the absolute lightest possible jib sheets to assist it in opening up in super light air. And we'll probably see it today. I might even switch these out before we go sailing. By tomorrow, 10 to 15, you'll probably put them back on. And if you're sailing with your wife or crew like that, you probably want to put them back on if you want to not sleep on the couch on the trip. Sailing 1-to-1 and 15 plus, you've got to have a lot of strength to get the jib in. It's almost unadvised, not advised. So we're going to go up with the halyard here really quickly. Winch handles right here. And then we're going to show you the cause and effect of different halyard tensions here. The best vantage point to probably get that is let's look at the leech as we fill the sail here. Very creepy. And we'll set that in a second.
I like this one. I use this one. I like the bigger window.
Where do you tie this off normally? Just right in here? Where do you come back to this? Oh, you go through the block. For now, so we're rigging the tail end of the jib sheet here and making sure that we don't have any wraps in the jib sheet. So back here as we trim it, we have very little wind, but you're going to be able to see as I ease off on the jib halyard here, what happens to the leech. So we can even wait for a puff for a second here. Give it 1 second, get some breeze. There's like wind right behind us. So here we go. I'm going to drop the halyard a little. You can see the leech open up and just drop the ease of 1 foot. Same thing, if I tighten it up, you can see the jib get harder at the leech. This looks a little better when there's wind, but that's kind of showing you the cause and effect on the halyard there.
Now drop it.
Yep, so here we go, we drop it a little, it should open up a little bit. Under load out on the water, it'll be a lot more obvious what it's doing. So also look at the amount of proceeds at the house here. If I go up, just 1 click, they almost disappear. So little lines start forming right here in the jib. And they kind of look like little proceeds. You know, on the edge of your eye, they call it that. You're kind of getting the same effect on one of the hangs. So in light air, you barely want to see this. So if I let off all the way here, 1 or 2 clicks, that's way too loose.
And then if I go up too tight here, more than comfortable. We really don't have any pressure for it. But if I go 3 or 4 foot, you almost see how I'm getting a vertical wrinkle going on there instead of horizontal wrinkle. You can barely see it in the loft, but the loft tension's going up. See how you're getting a crease just like on your outhaul. Now if I ease off, see how the jib is forming a lot better. You want that jib to form in light air, so be careful. Don't put it too tight.
And you're saying you want to set that on a downwind?
Yep. So we have our jib all the way out. You want to carry that out? Yep. We would have the jib trimmed out probably to about there. And then I'd go ahead and jug it. Based on the setup, how much pressure's in the setup.
And now we're in a downwind wave.
So on the 2 to 1, we're going to rig the other side here in a moment, but we'll move on for the discussion. Jim's got an interesting setup here for his spin pull. He put an extra eye in here where he's able to stow his pole off the floor. I actually somewhat like this idea because you have less chance of popping the airbag, and it's not going to fumble and go back into where all your pull lines are. It's easier for the crew. Who here has ever had their jib sheets get wrapped around their spin pole?
And main sheet and board line.
So we actually have a piece of gutter in our boat. It's downspout from Home Depot, plastic, super light, and we stow our pole in the rain gutter all the way up here on the deck. It's the same idea. You're getting it away from the floor.
I like
it's not
that.
going to pop the airbag. Really nice solution is to set the pole. All you got to do is take this off, pull it out, and then you're off to the races. Okay. Putting it back, that'll probably end up on the floor, but all you gotta do is snap it in and it's done. So that's an alteration that you don't see on many boats. As we work our way back, he's got his level gauge here and his tactical compass here. And he also has a light board here for writing his bearings going upwind. You should be able to memorize that. So normally we don't have a whiteboard, and it's kind of messy to write on the deck. So it's not bad for you don't. Notice there's no gear up front. Actually, we have a violation. So what we're seeing here is you want no weight in the front. You literally want to, we've removed our buckets, so there's no temptation for the crew to put any weight up there. You want to get all the weight either centered or back in the boat. So with these, I would remove this and the buckets, and you have one strap in there, so he has almost no weight. But I've seen people put the anchor up there, good 15, 20 pounds of gear, and that's going to put that area of the boat that we don't want in the water further in the water.
That just basically lets crew sit further forward.
Well, you could do that, but really what you're doing is allowing the boat to respond by having the bow pop up more than it would with the dead weight up there. So if you think about it, you scoot back, which bow is going to pop more, the one with no weight up front or with 20 pounds up there? So the boat becomes more responsive with less weight up in the front, especially because we want that part of the boat out of the water as much as possible. So this is minor, this is okay to have up front. I'd probably just move one bailer and keep one up here for bailing downwind. And yeah, the buckets would go.
Don't you have to have a bucket?
I don't. We're talking these. Your
Yeah.
little stowage. Those
There is
are-
a bucket.
yeah.
No, but that's still, I thought those were part of the, had to have
No,
those installed, no?
they added those after the original. Like that's not in the. It's up to the owner to do what they want there.
Okay.
That. He's got his dry erase here for writing on the. And typically in your bag here, this is where, like, we like to keep extra gloves, sunscreen, and all your sailing stuff. Just keep it in the bag, and it's handy in case you forget it in your car or anything. Always have extras. And I always really bring a few extra shackle pins. And just a bunch of little things. You'd be surprised, a little piece of dynamo can literally fix anything that breaks on the boat. So it's always handy to have a little bit extra line. It's kind of a little soft there where he doesn't have much, maybe one little piece there to deal with a breakdown. Oh, you got a bunch of stuff back there. I would actually sail without that bag. I would just go with a couple. We're a little messy in our boat, so we just shove a few pieces of extra line, a bunch of shackles in the back, and a couple of winch handles too, just in case you lose one.
What do you do if you broke a handle? Do you know how you get that looseness out?
Yeah, so when you break a handle, a lot of times if you have a screwdriver or something on board, you have to shove in through the other side to force the metal back out. So if this thing were to break off and you couldn't get it out, you have to have something you could shove in through the other side to press it out. Pretty hit it. I've never seen it come out like that. But yeah, you need to have some way of getting it out. So a lot of times keeping like a number one flathead aboard somewhere is a good option there to deal with that type of breakdown. The other way to go with it is they do make stainless steel winch handles. The downside is you can hurt the box because you could over tension your handle. These are actually designed to break away if you overload the jib halyard. Usually when that happens, you have a mistake with your rigging where your jib halyard's wrapped on something, and so you're having to really crank it more than you need to. So if something doesn't feel right, check your rigging. This boat has another interesting thing added to it, which is a breakaway vang preventer. And this is so you don't break your boom. Let's say you're sailing in big breeze and you go for a bear away. Well, what will happen if you have too much vang on is the boom will break right here at the rivet. You'll snap it. And that's no good because your day is over at that point. So this is designed to actually break under a certain amount of load. And this will keep you so you still have the vang on, but it's going to keep you from breaking your boom. Very good idea if you're not really meticulous about easing that vang at the weather to go ahead and add this. It can only help you. This isn't going to hurt you. The other thing I'd kind of beef up is I don't trust this line. I'd probably go with something that had a little bit more load capability to it, like a piece of dynamo. Jib's vang, this is stock from the factory. He's got the cascading vang just like you see in most boats. This works well. There's some different configurations, but the key here is this is easy to take on and off when you're in on shore, and you can go ahead and furl the sails and then tuck the boom away. Big thing here about the vang. How many people have stopper knots in their vang? So we set a knot at the end of the vang here for light air. So with the boom all the way out downwind, that's going to be the most ease that your vang will ever be. So what you do is you take your vang system and you figure out exactly where your knot needs to be. So the idea is you get to come around weather, make sure the vang's off, and then you don't have to worry about playing the vang downwind. You can just let it go to the knot and it should be right. Now if the breeze picks up or dies down, you might need to move the knot a little bit. Or like if the breeze picks up, you could just add a little vang and then feed it to get your leech rate just right for the downwind. We see a lot of people have this too tight. So make sure when you're sailing downwind that the leech is twisting open a little bit, and you're going to be able to sail lower and faster with that. So stopper knots are big, and stopper knots are added on your vang. They can be added up here on the outhaul, and this is a nice one. How many people come around weather and can just blow their outhaul, but not have it, not have it too loose? You want to have a stopper knot that's going to allow you to do that just in the right spot. So make sure that you're adjusting that on the water. This one looks like it goes 100%. So you might actually want to adjust this a little bit out on the water to get it for racing. When you're ashore, the easiest thing to do is once this is down, blow the outhaul, and then you can undo the pin, and then it makes it so you have the slack to undo the shackle on the outhaul. Same thing with topping lift. We set our topping lift so the pole is either dead level or a little bit below level, but never below that. So as we go ahead and set a pole here, get a snap on the jib, we go out. And a lot of people these days are sailing top ring, but you could set it either way. See how he's almost dead level? And if we go ahead and let this go, now if this ever uncleats itself, it's not going to go all the way to the deck. So a lot of times you're going to set it there. I'd probably set mine just a little bit higher. We never do tight reaching, and that's kind of a tight reaching angle. We normally would set ours just a little bit high right there. And that's the lowest you're ever going to put the pole. So we move this knot in a couple inches, and that's it.
So when you're in a drifter, you don't end up lowering your pole over?
Not really. I've never really sailed with it that low right there. So we just have the knot in a slightly different place. Same thing with the vang. In the vang, you're going to actually change the knot every time you go sailing, because this is going to change depending on where your halyard tension is. So if you think about it in heavy air, if we're lowering the halyard 3, 4, 5 clicks, the boom's going to be much lower. So your stopper knot's going to have to be moved completely between light air and heavy air. Almost every time you go sailing, you're going to be adjusting this. These never change. So what I'd actually do is with a little piece of either fishing line or just like whipping string, is go ahead and run a needle through and wrap it a few times right where your knot should be. That way if you ever remove the knot or someone does that, you're able to put it right back, right where you know it should be. So it's just another indicator of where to put things. Other nice thing about the vang, he's got a little piece of bungee here. This is to keep this from going into the centerboard as the centerboard is being dropped. So it's nice to add this. We actually don't have this on ours, and some days I wish we did have this installed. It does get in the way a little bit of everything as you're sailing, but it's nice to have this when you're racing. Centerboard, same thing. You're going to go ahead and mark that with a knot. We're actually going to show that in the water with the blade down 100%, so people get a really good understanding of what we're looking at when we make that knot decision, where to put it. Hiking lines here. Jim's got his hiking line in the right spot. Some of the boats, I've seen these pretty far back, where if you've got your hiking line attached further back, you're going to tend to sit further back. And the problem is, it's the perfect spot for the crew weight, literally right here at the front of the cab. The other thing you're going to want to set, and Jim's illegal here, look at this.
Way too long.
So the line's not supposed to go outside of the railing here, and you really want to put your knots so they're just in the right spot. Also, I trust this, but I don't really trust this, and since we have to come shorter anyways, I'd rather do that instead of have the knot in, because if this came undone, guess where I'm going? Into the drink. So the other thing is, everyone knows that they're supposed to cross their legs when they hike out on the hiking line like this. I somewhat trust this, but I don't, so I'm not going to go full out. But notice also here how the knot is not in a comfortable position. I literally am like having to chest this in order to do this properly. So I would move the knots so my arms are at length. So my second hand would probably be right here. My first hand would probably be right up there. And I'll go ahead and add those knots.
The other thing is from factory, that piece comes there, and that's exactly where the crew's going to sit in medium air if you want it in the middle of the boat. So crew complaint also was a motivator.
The other nice thing, and you can do it, but you have to change the rigging, is you can move this back. You then have to move all your blocks and systems, but the nice thing about that is, like he's saying, the crew has a little more room to roam on the top cap here. Originally, they didn't have the cassettes at all on the top cap. So this is kind of an addition over the years to the Scot in order to make the boat a little bit more saleable. One of the things I would change on Jim's boat is, I think that the factory line here is not a great line. It's serviceable, but I'd probably change this out to a thinner diameter piece of Dynamo so it would run better through the blocks and have a little better play. Remember, every time you push that pole out, you're meeting the resistance of the topping lift system. So if you can reduce that, it's going to make it easier on your crew to set that pole every time.
And David, I did that on the Cunningham because there was too much resistance, and this made a world of difference in terms of
just the line selection.
Yeah.
The one downside is you can't use Dynamo everywhere. If you try to use it for your jib sheet, it'll flatten the line and it'll slip through the cleats. So just be aware there that if you go too narrow of a diameter, make sure it works in your cleat, or else one day in heavy air you're just going to see like your bang slip off on it. Jib sheets here, we tend to tie our jib ends together. I know the other side isn't rigged, but the nice thing about doing that, we'll kind of make pretend here for a second, is you can always retrieve your jib sheet from the weather side. So with these tied together, let's say I'm sailing upwind and somehow my jib sheets are down in the floor. Let's say this is leeward and I'm on weather. I can always grab from here and retrieve my jib sheet without having to go to leeward. So it's really nice. The other thing I like to do with my jib sheets when we're sailing upwind is you see the button here for the cars? I'll hang my jib sheet like that when I don't want to hold it and I'm focusing on hiking here. And that will allow me to have it in a really nice position. So let's say I'm sailing along, now I want to adjust my jib. All I've got to do is reach forward, grab it, and now I can, and then put it right back. It seems to stay there really nicely, and it's a good place to ride with. Just remember before you tack, make sure that you get this off the button. If not, you're going to get a tack and it'll be hung up and you won't be able to ease the jib out. So we're doing things like that. Jib car is obviously all the way forward. Notice Jim here has a sticker to judge where he's trimming. Okay, ideally you're looking up at the leech, but sometimes you don't have the luxury because of where you're sitting in the boat. And this is a good second system to kind of give you an indicator of where you should be trimming. So they sell these stickers, I believe, pretty much anywhere online and at West Marine. I'd pick up a bunch of them because you can label a lot of different things around the boat with a measuring stick and create some accuracy to your control lines. Like you could imagine here on the outhaul, you could do something, probably do something in a few places, but mainly the jib sheets here are the good ones. As we come back here, final things, if you look at the main sheet here, everyone knows they can use 2 ratchets where you need that ratchet, now you have it. I believe this is a 75 auto ratchet. This is one of the bigger blocks. I believe they, by default, have 57 millimeter block for the main sheet block. So most people like the upgrade. It gives you a little more oomph in your main sheet, kind of feels better. I like it. I've got a 57 on mine. I mean, sorry, a 75 on mine.
I think Dave, the class will say one of those 2 ratchets has to be an auto ratchet.
Yeah, so it's this one, it's auto.
It can be either one.
Yeah.
But,
Finally, in the back, he's got a setup here for either a 2-to-1 or you potentially could go 3-to-1. And we've really tried to get away from the 3-to-1 because when you hit the leeward mark, trimming 50 feet of sheet is impossible. There's just too much sheet to get in on the rounding, so you would sacrifice having the main luff the entire time by going 3-to-1. So the reason people are going 3-to-1 is typically because you have too much resistance on the main sheet. So one way to deal with that is to add vang. As you add vang, it's pulling the boom down, so it should be easier to pull the main. So you really don't need the 3-to-1. You can stick with a 2-to-1. And we've not really seen the benefit of the 3-to-1. So finally, with your rudder, just make sure everything's nice and aligned back there. I know in a lot of the lakes people are kicking them up. Dave's got a really good solution on, it's kind of a turn pin where you can lock it down or you can pull the turn pin and allow it to come up.
it's a plastic bolt, so if you were to run it around, it would shoot.
The idea is the end of the rudder heads like to open up over time. If we go look at half of the Scots here, they probably have a flared opening toward the back side of the rudder head. And the issue with that is the rudder starts to turn sideways in the cassette. So as you start building pressure on the rudder in 15 knots or more, you get to the point where you have excess weather helm or it even cavitates. Who here has had to fight a boat where the rudder continuously cavitates whenever it heels up? Does anyone have the...
Similar about that, the cavitation, what is it they call it, the cavitation?
It's the tilt in the blade. So with the blade down, as the blade loads, if you have any play in the rudder head, it's going to turn more and more sideways in the rudder head. And as it does that, that's the same thing as increasing the angle of attack on the blade. At some point, that's going to get so great, it's going to create ventilation in the leading edge of the centerboard, and you're going to lose your rudder. It's going to cavitate all the way.
So yeah, the lock pin from the factory is here. So we've moved our lock this hole to down here. With this slot, you can open it up at this time. And then let it move sideways in here. So if you put your lock pin here, and you've just got a plastic bolt with a knob on it, you can squeeze this together. It locks it down and squeezes this together so that you don't have this flopping side to side.
It makes a huge difference in breeze.
Is that like a 1/8 inch? I'll show you one. It's on my boat. Yeah. Come out and look at it. I got them on Amazon. I got a little baggie of them. For like $10, you could do 10 boats.
Yeah, it's good for the fleet.
The engineering fee is 10 beers.
The final thing on the rudder head there is just make sure that you don't let the wood get bare on the varnish. So if you're starting to see that re-varnish, what will happen is the wood will swell and then the tiller won't fit in the rudder head anymore. Tiller extension's really up to whatever like you'd like to use. A lot of people use just the regular rubber in there and whatever they think is the right length. We see that the longer your tiller extension, the harder it is to pull off a roll tack. So if you're getting stuck on that a lot, maybe reduce, like just cut off an inch or two on the tiller extension. You should be able to sit pretty far forward in light air. So if the tiller extension was here, we could even clip his in. You can see that if he really wanted to, he literally could come up all the way to the crew right here in light air, or sit pretty far back. This is probably a little longer than ours by about that much, but mine's just a little bit shorter. I also like putting a nice ball on the end as a stopper. We're doing a lot of little things in the boat where if you think about just tiller extension work alone on managing the tiller, when I'm sailing upwind, I see a lot of people kind of do the microphone where they hold this up here. Well, what's going to happen is you've worked the boat. Since this hand isn't really stable, you're going to move the tiller a lot, probably times which you really don't want it. When I'm sailing upwind, I tend to lock my tiller down on my lap a lot more. That's going to stabilize the tiller. And so when I go work the boat, like if I pump or work out, I'm not disturbing my rudder at all. I also have, if you look at my footwork here in the boat, I'm locking in on the inside railing here, plus I'm holding my back leg out like this. That's creating opposing forces, which allows me to be very aggressive working the boat. If you look right now, I can hardly shake the boat. But if I go ahead and lock myself in here, and I do that, I can shake the boat. I can flatten, I can exert my weight. So remember how from our discussion, you want to be very aggressive with your weight placement? Half of that is good body mechanics with your footwork in the boat. You'd be surprised at what we're locking onto and how we're working the boat. So like coming out of attack, typically if I'm coming from the other side, I'm still steering behind my back as I flatten the boat. Okay, and as I land, I'm hipping down like this, my foot's like that, and I'm able to flatten and then go ahead and switch my tiller hand over to my main sheet, and then I'm underway. I'll switch back into my stance and start sailing the boat like I should. If I need to move in, I can quickly and easily scoot in, move out, move forward, or sit back if I need to. On a roll tack, you're going to have to move back in the boat because you can't cross straight through the back end of the centerboard trunk. So a lot of times people have their feet in the wrong position to really get underneath themselves. So you can imagine if my leg's back over here when I start the roll tack, I've got nothing to plant off of. I have to stand up and I can't really do a roll tack. But if I scoot back, plant my back foot underneath, then when I go to roll and cross and I'll leave the tiller here, I can explode off this back foot, throw my hip right into the rail, and then flatten aggressively. Okay? And you notice where my feet are. Right where they should, and then I can easily transition. So when we're sailing around in the boat here, I really think a lot of people underestimate exactly a lot of the detail that goes into your footwork, your body work, your body mechanics. It all adds up. This is the great thing about putting the camera on the boat, is we can see all of this stuff in detail down inside the boat on what you're doing. Everything should go back to what we talked about this morning. Where does the boat need to be heeling? What happens with the sail trim, and how should you be steering the boat through each one of your maneuvers? We can talk it out. The interesting thing is, on a roll tack, it all comes down to timing. So initially on a roll tack, a lot of times, I'm looking at the boat and saying, okay, do I have the right amount of helm to tack the boat at whatever pressure we're at? If I feel it's light, like today, and we don't have enough heel and helm to really turn the boat, I don't want to use excess rudder. So I'm going to have my crew move to leeward. I'm going to move in, and I'm going to look at my sail and maybe try to engage the leech just a little to try to get some pressure, but I'm going to be patient until the boat's set up right. I don't want to enter the tack. Once I've got the helm and heel right, then all I really have to do is kind of gently start to push the tiller away, and the boat's naturally going to come up into the wind. So the crew then is timing exactly when they want to uncleat the jib. You don't want to uncleat the jib too early because then you're missing out on pressure. If you uncleat it right when it luffs, that's the perfect time. So if you think about it, we're sailing close hauled, you're going to be up about 15 to 20 degrees, and then right as the load comes off the jib, all the crew has to do is go click. Now they're ready to backwind, so it's out of the cleat. And then the next thing we're going to do is time a roll. So we don't try to roll when we uncleat the jib. We're actually rolling after we're head to wind. So we continue to head the boat all the way up into the wind. Then PJ and I are kind of preloaded here where we're ready to throw our weight out for the roll tack. Go ahead and cleat. So right as we get past head to wind, simultaneously PJ and I go to the rail, roll as hard as we can. PJ's backwinding the jib, and I increase the rotation on the tiller a little bit because as we roll, I can get away with that. Okay, if I do it too early, I'm going to be using too much rudder. And if I don't do it at all, we're not going to rotate through that no sail zone fast enough. So we want to get onto the new tack and going. So we roll, 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 and we actually roll the boat all the way until the sails fill in light air. We don't stop rolling until the jib's filled, the main's filled, and then as we start to feel the pressure, we'll go to weather. In heavier air, that all happens quicker. We'll complete the tack right when we feel the pressure we get. Most teams we see are rolling too early and crossing too early. So they'll go and do the roll, they just won't wait till head to wind, so they'll start rolling right when they uncleat the jib. And then they'll stop rolling just after head to wind. So they're already crossing when you still want to be turning the boat, so you're fighting your helm at that point. So all of that, back to our initial discussion, you figure out your mechanics in the boat, you figure out the right helm, heel for the boat handling, what you want to be doing with your weight placement and sail trim, and you really can start to put together some really good boat handling maneuvers out on the water. So what we're going to do this afternoon, obviously we're missing the main ingredient today, so we're probably going to drop a single boat in, and we're going to show you right off the dock. You see how there's a little micro puff right off the end of the dock? When the breeze comes up, we'll probably trade on and off with different people where, like PJ and I will jump in and show you how aggressively and what we're doing on the roll. And then, I don't know, it's up to you, Jim, either use this boat or some other boats where maybe we have just a couple boats in the water. And I think everyone trusts each other enough where we're not going to be ramming other boats or docks today, where we could go out and do a little bit of boat handling just right off the end of the dock and see what you look like on camera here and see what improvements can be made. Does anyone have any questions about rigging?
Yeah, David, you talked earlier about what you do to the rudder. Do you have a lifting bridle on your rudder, or do you remove that?
No. On our rudder, we pinned it down permanently. We removed all excess parts.
Okay.
So it doesn't have the bungee system, and it doesn't have the uplift at all. When we get to shore, we just use the main sheet, go back, pull the tiller extension, the tiller, and then just go ahead and lift the rudder and put it away.
A little bit depends on where you sail, right? Yeah, it does. So like our boat lifts are really shallow and it bleeds all over the lake. Yeah. So we don't pin ours down on a leading way. Yeah. We have to right. Yeah. So if I've left the mechanical on it pretty up and down, even though we
You have something like this to keep it from catching on.
like, okay, I don't see
Yeah. That works.
David,